questions on your table to talk about. And this is a time now, you have had your share of chatting about, talking about the questions. And now, as members of the panel, we are going to look at some of those questions. We're going to discuss them. And you can then share with us what your thoughts are in terms of whether what we've said is actually what you came up with, or if there are gaps, you can ask questions, or you can add to what the panel will be talking about. But we'll try and make it very quick. It would have to be succinct and to the point, so we don't kind of waste your time, because I recognize that everyone is tired. And I think I need to zip up, because I tend to talk a little bit too much. So can we look at the question 1?
2 months ago, 12-year-old Richard disclosed to a friend that his father had slapped him and left finger marks. His little brother Charles, who's 8, recently reported to his class teacher that he overheard his parents arguing downstairs, which woke his little sister up. They reportedly stayed in their room hugging each other in fear. He advised that the arguments between his parents happens a lot, and his mother has been screaming at him even more. Mum is a stay-at-home mum, and Dad works full-time. Dad states that he experienced beatings as a child, and there is nothing wrong with slapping his own son. No one can tell him what to do. Mum supports Dad.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Ladle. Beautiful Ladle. Thank you. Just looking at the pool of expert professionals I've got on the table, am I right to say, Nana, can you start by sharing your perspective on that question?
Okay. We have about 4 questions to that case scenario. And the first one is, what might the issues be for the people in the family? What might be the issues for the couple? And do you want me to give the answers, or we want the crowd to give the answers first?
You want to tell us what you think, and then we can add our perspectives, and then the guests can say what they think as well.
Okay. So 2 months ago, 12-year-old Richard disclosed to a friend that his father had slapped him and left finger marks. And if he had slapped him and left finger marks, that means he really did slap him very hard for him to sustain bruises. And if he was able to disclose now, after a period of 2 months, that means it could be something he's been battling with for so long to be able to disclose this to a friend. Or it could be that it had been happening to him for so long that he had made the decision to disclose. There's a little brother as well, Charles, who is 8, who also overhears his parents arguing all the time. He overhears it, he doesn't see it. He doesn't know what is going on. He can't actually hear exactly what they're arguing about. And therefore, as a child, an 8-year-old, very loving towards his parents, for the 2 people that he loves the most to be arguing would have an emotional impact on him. And then he advised to the class teacher that the arguments between the parents happens a lot. And his mother has been screaming at him even more. That to me is, the mother is taking her frustrations onto the child. There are issues within the family home, and they are taking it onto the children. And for a child to sort of be burdened with the issues of adults, it leads them to mental health, because it impacts on their emotional well-being. It does invariably would impact on their psychological well-being as well. Mom is a stay-at-home mom. A stay-at-home mom doesn't mean this mom shouldn't interact with the wider world. But most stay-at-home moms are stay-at-home moms. And depending on the kind of ethnic background of that family, they may not be really interacting with the wider community or society. And therefore, she would be very inclusive, very isolated within her community. And that in itself can be impacting on this woman, because there are so many groups, such as domestic violence groups, that could support this family. But because she's sort of a stay-at-home mom and may not know what is in that community, she will not be able to access that support. Dad states that he experienced beating as a child, and therefore he finds nothing wrong with slapping his own son. But then what I always say about this is, his experiences as a child when he was being beaten was not a good thing. And it's still my perception as an adult that if you are a man, if you are a woman, and you want to beat and slap children, you go and find your mate. You go and find someone you're co-equal, and then you pick up a fight. You don't take your anger, you don't take your issues on children and then justify it by saying, because it happened to me, I can do it to my child. Your child is not a chattel in the home. Your child is an individual that you are trying to raise, to empower them to be someone great in the community. By hitting and beating your children and thinking it's the right thing to do, what you tend to do to these children is to disempower them. You break their identities, you break their self-esteem, and it happens a lot as a social worker. I've had so many experiences in school where teachers are telling me she's got low self-esteem, and I'm thinking, what is low self-esteem? What is that? Low self-esteem. And then I look back and I'm thinking, this is because of the parenting, because these children are not being made to be assertive in their homes. We have brought a culture of they can be seen and not heard, but among their peers, they are having dialogues with their parents. They are empowering their children. And when these children sort of interact with the wider community, they don't stand a chance. So, I mean, it's a case scenario that you can look on and say, this is very common among our Black communities. But at the end of the day, it goes a long way to impact on these children. And these very children are going to be the future leaders of this country, the future leaders of our homes, and the future leaders of our community. So we need to look at it carefully. So I have put my perspective on it, and I'll ask other people to talk.
Fantastic. And just before anybody else says something, obviously you are a child protection worker. What are some of the scenarios, what are some of the things that could happen in that scenario with you coming into the family home where, you know, those things have been, you know, reported? What are the risks there for that family?
Okay. The risk for that family is the 12-year-old has disclosed he's been hit, he's got marks. So it doesn't become, it's not a report anymore, it's a crime. A crime has been committed because it has left marks on the child. The law does not say you cannot hit your child, and I'm making it very clear here. It does not say you cannot hit your child. You can hit your child, but you should not hit your child with an implement or anything that is with the intention of maiming or harming that child. To have been able to slap someone to leave your finger marks, that means you really went for that child with all the anger you had, the pent-up anger and emotions you had in him. Unfortunately, the 12-year-old is the victim here, but the other children in the home are now victims, because when the police officer goes into the home or into the school, the other children are also going to be talking to police officers. Social services are also going to be involved. The community pediatrician is also going to be involved because they need to do a medical to really find out whether that finger marks is the marks of the father. And sometimes we actually go down to statistics and logistics where they have to actually sort of, the father's finger marks, is it the same as what is on the child? So we go through all that. And the social worker is the one there experiencing all this, trying to support the family and the children. These children, where the father lies is saying he doesn't care what happens, he is going to be quite intimidating to deal with. And we will be wondering whether the children will be safe to be left within that environment. With a mother who is also supporting the father, depending on what that mother is telling us at the time. We have to be looking at the wider family, if there's a wider family. And for most of us, we don't have a wider family. For our other counterparts, they have their mothers, they have their brothers, they have their uncles, they have school friends. But some of us parents here, coming from an ethnic background, coming from Africa, we could just be on our own with our husbands and children. We don't have anybody, and therefore you are paving the way for your child to get into the care system. And I keep saying this, one day in a care home for the life of a child, you have destroyed that child. Because in as much as that child is petrified of their parents, they are the angel you know is better than the devil you do not know. So is it the other way around? Oh, yes. So at the end of the day, when they are out there and you think, yes, if that's what she wants, she should end up in care, that child is going through an emotionally difficult time and would be wishing I had never even reported that incident to school. So what you'll be having next time is children colluding to protect parents, suffering harm, and then getting into the mental health system when they are adults and they cannot cope, or growing up to be adults and becoming perpetrators themselves to their families.
Does anybody here have something to add to that?
from an educational perspective, imagine that child who has just been harmed getting to school. Okay, you heard about the brother, heard mum and dad, or perhaps witnesses slapping. But most of the time, what actually happens, it's very subliminally in a lesson. You will find that child who has been abused at home, one of the colleagues will look at that child and there's a mark. Something is said by that person to that child. The child may choose not to say anything because they want to protect their parents. But the next child gets it and it goes to the pastoral manager. From the pastoral manager, the head is being told. And I've been in situations where, as a head, I've actually called social services. And now, it's not a very pleasant thing to do, particularly if you're an African, because I understand. As a child, I was beaten up, perhaps smacked in my case. But I know cases back home where we beat to hurt a child. We don't beat to correct. So how do you then explain to the social services that, well, that's that man's culture, where he comes from, that is permissible, that is acceptable? In a few cases, I have found myself actually educating African parents. Now, for all of you here, I'm not saying you guys are perpetrators, but how many of you really understand Ringa Ringa Roses? How many of you can do the hokey cokey? Now, I know the previous speakers have talked about assimilation and integration. They're very similar, but they're two different things. Integration, you go in, you know what you're doing, you retain your personality. Assimilation, you change completely. Most of us neither integrate nor assimilate. Most of us. That's other people, them, that Oyibo people, them. No. If we want to be a successful group of, or a community, we need to understand the values of our host country. I am not saying, or we are not saying that our values back home are wrong. We're saying, as an immigrant community, we come with a set of experiences, but we need to adapt. We need to take on board and really understand the resident values in order to bring our children within the society they know, not the society we would like them to, the society they're in. That's their only society. Thank you.
My background is intellectual disability and autism, but during the course of my training, I had to work as a child psychiatrist, and this is a very, very common referral that we receive every now and then. And the good news is that most children have a remarkable capacity to cope with it. So the good news is most children will go through such, like the previous speaker said, some of us, were disciplined with physical means, and we came out really well. But if that is not the case, I know Nana briefly just glossed over some of the effect. What it does, in effect, is set the platform for a wide range of things that you would wish you never started. I mean, you spoke about low self-esteem. The impact of that is, a tendency to try and want to conform, and that could lead them to criminality, lead them to the criminal justice system. And earlier on, we spoke about how we model our behaviors from the influences around us. What you're doing is teaching that young child that, the way you exert control is by inflicting some sort of physical pain or abuse on others, and you keep the cycle running. And again, I've seen it played out several times. Self-harming behaviors, they cut themselves, take overdoses, present to A&E with emotional regulatory issues, anxiety issues, depressive issues. So the good news is that for the most part, it turns out relatively okay. But if it goes wrong, it could go wrong big time. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Would you like to say something?
Yeah. I'd would like to add something. The last question there, or D section, says what may be helpful. What I would say, Connie mentioned something when she was talking about her history. She talked about knowledge is power, and when you get knowledge, then it brings about transformation. So for most of us parents here, we may actually need to inform ourselves about other methods of discipline. There's a lot of information online. I had to, because I am a teacher too, and I know obviously that smacking children is not acceptable. So I as a professional, I wouldn't want to kind of go down that route. So I had to actually go and read about alternative methods of discipline. And one thing that I have come to learn is what I call positive discipline, where you set clear boundaries, where the children know the rules and the consequences. And after the consequences have been applied, to get the child into a discussion and then to reaffirm your love for your child. And that way they learn that you didn't discipline them because you hated them. Again, discipline here is not smacking. There are lots of different ways you can discipline a child. But whichever method you use, at the end of it, the reconciliation must take place and you reassure your child that you love them. And that way, that bond between parent and child is maintained. So we might need to seek help.
Can I just put a last sort of comment on this? My argument and counter-argument to what he just said, more or less, was, I don't care if you're a Nigerian, you're a Ghanaian, wherever you're coming from. You are living in the United Kingdom. We have the Children Act 1989, 2004, and you've got to find a balance between our culture and the culture here. If you choose to educate your child in the United Kingdom, then you're going to find ways to get a balance of raising those children. Unless you're thinking, I have one leg in the United Kingdom and another leg wherever I'm coming from, and somewhere along the line, I'm going to whisk my child off when I can't stand the system anymore. But what you're doing to that child is not going to fit into that system where you grew up in, and you haven't enabled them to fit into the system they are growing in. So then again, you open them to mental health. So long, as far as I'm concerned, your culture is a beautiful thing. And a culture is a way of life. You take what is good out of every culture wherever we go. We make the best out of it. Our children are not our enemies. They are not part of the chattels in our home. They are part of people and children that you want them to be better members, part of a society. It's a system that you want to integrate your child into to become a better person so that they do not miss opportunities in future. So therefore, if you have a culture that is quite oppressive, it's not benefiting that child in the long run. It's destroying them. So I really have very little tolerance for because I'm from Ghana, because I'm from Nigeria. It doesn't work for me. And I hope it won't work for you because we want the best for our children. We need to let these children stand tall. We need to empower them. We need to make them strong kids. They need to be confident kids because when you have a confident kid, they tend to explore their territories and they excel. If you have a child that you intimidate, you have problems on your hands because even when you grow old, your children are still going to be tagging around you because either they are in the prison system and you need to be doing visits to them, or they're in the mental health team and you need to be doing something about them. And now that they are old and you want to go back home, it's not going to be possible. So let's look at the bigger picture, the wider picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. And what I actually take from this conversation is the idea that the rationale for discipline is to actually instill a sense of responsibility, a sense of right and wrong. And if that's the rationale for discipline, then it has to be done in a positive way, not necessarily to inflict pain. And we need to be in a position where when after a period of misattunement, which means after a period of disciplining, you need to create an opportunity to be able to reconnect with your child. Because what is important for us to note is that when we discipline, the child actually dissociates from themselves and from you. So if you're not in the mindset of reattuning with your child before they go to bed, if that becomes very regular, then obviously the child becomes detached and it opens up a whole can of worms. Thank you so much.